Okay, it's a pleasure to be here. The focus of this talk is going to be the transition of Appalachian State University from a teacher's college to a university. This took place in 1967. So what I'm doing is I'm going to concentrate on the years 60 through 80. Of course, 67 is kind of in the middle of that. And I refer to this as building a foundation for the university, because by no means was the university complete in 1980. But I feel like we did, you'll see at the end of this talk, we did certainly lay a foundation for that change. And the major things that I'm going to concentrate on are the physical campus, the organizational structure, the curriculum, the faculty, computing and computation, and some miscellaneous factors. So roughly the way I'll do this, I'll look at what things look like in 1960, then I'll eventually look at what things look like in 1980 and kind of in between. First, I want to start with the UNC system. Today, the system looks like that column on the left. And this is what those previous schools looked like in 1960. They weren't the same schools. And like our institution, they all went through the same sorts of changes that we did, maybe slightly different, but they had to change. Now, it's interesting to note in this column on the right, you only see the word university up there one time. So all of these schools were designated as colleges in 1960. They were different types of schools. Of course, we were a teachers' college. East Carolina was a teachers' college. Western Carolina was a teachers' college. Schools like the Women's College in North Carolina was a women's college, and it eventually became UNCG. Wilmington and Charlotte, in fact, weren't even founded until after World War II in the 40s, when they started as community colleges. Pembroke State, very unique school. It began as a school for the Native Americans. Now they're officially called the Lumbeys. In the past, they weren't sure what they were. Now, some of the things that took place for those universities, including us, was in 1963, as I said, UNC Chapel Hill, which was just called the UNC, was the only state university. North Carolina State didn't become designated university until 1963. At the same time, the Women's College in North Carolina became UNCG. And up until that time, the 15 state schools operated as separate entities. When it came budget time, they each went to the legislature individually, did their own begging for money. And the first consolidation was just 3 schools in 1963. In the mid-60s, Charlotte came along. They wanted to be a university. Then everybody else said, well, we want to be universities too. So by the end of the 60s, every state school had been designated a university. It wasn't until 1971, right after that, that what we now call the Consolidated University System, which is a complete administrative unit for all of the state schools, was formed. Now, if we look at the history of Appalachian State, it begins in 1899 with what's called Watauga Academy. Now, the Watauga Academy, I'm not sure exactly what to call it in today's terms. It was set up as sort of a training center for teachers. It wasn't a college. I'm not even sure they gave any sorts of degrees. They just had training for teachers. And you can see they changed the name of it to Appalachian Training School for Teachers. 1925 is designated a normal school. Well, a normal school was really another name for a teacher's college. In 29, it became Appalachian State Teachers College. So it really wasn't until the 1920s that it began to look like what we might think of as being a college today. And of course, in 1967, it became Appalachian State University. It's interesting to note that the founder of Watauga Academy in 1899 was Blanford Bernard Doherty, and he didn't retire from the school until 55 years later. So he was like president of all these institutions for 55 years. And then we got a new president, Bill Clemens, in 1955. So there are a lot of interesting books that have been written locally about this early history, and they're quite interesting reading if you're interested in those sorts of things. Now, roughly, these are approximate numbers just to give you an idea of the period from 60 through 80. These are what the undergraduate enrollments were. Now, I'm going to take you on a little tour through the campus, and the way I'm going to approach it is I'm going to say, look out on the campus today. What do you see out there that was here in 1960? And I'm not including dormitories and miscellaneous buildings, primarily academic buildings. Well, not much. There were four buildings. Now, you may recognize the names, you may not. If you go where the current library is, there are three buildings in a row there. There's the current library, the brick building below it. The brick building below it was the old Doherty Library. And the building below that was the library in between. It's now a classroom building. Chapel Wilson and Smith Wright, those are those two old stone buildings that were built by the Roosevelt administration in the 1930s. Chapel Wilson is right there behind the library, and Smith Wright is right beyond it. And I.G. Greer is down next to Sanford Hall. So if you look at a map, this is where those four buildings were. And in the old days, almost all the campus was right here in Sanford Hall. There was almost nothing over here except some dormitories. You may know the old Needland Hall is sitting over here somewhere by the duck pond. It is an old dormitory. It was built in the 30s. It was around back in the 60s. The football stadium, now Theodore Stadium, which is over here, it was actually under construction in 1960 and it opened in 1962. If you look around and say, well, what buildings you see out there today that existed in 1970? Well, the list is quite a bit longer. Of course, the other four are at the top. You try to recognize a lot of these. A lot of these have been extremely remodeled in that time period. For instance, Clemens Stewart Center has been expanded at least twice, maybe three times. So it's about three times as big as it was originally. A lot of those old buildings, like the old science building, has been completely overhauled. But they're underneath the current veneers out there somewhere. So here you can see a much wider scattering of buildings of around 1980. And if you jump up, 1970. If you jump up to 1980, then you begin to see buildings popping up on the other side of the road. Okay. But you also realize there are a lot of buildings today that were around at that time. And if you think about the locations of the math department, particularly considering you get ready to move next year over to Duncan Hall. When I came here, we were in Smith Wright Hall. Okay, that's the building we were just talking about, the old stone building over below the library. We originally went into that building in 1940. Before 1940, there were a lot of old buildings around what's now Sanford Mall that had been destroyed. And there was a science building and a classroom building over in that area. And that's where mathematics had been located. Then we moved in 69, Sanford Hall was brand new. We moved into that building with about 3 or 4 other departments. We outgrew that building. We moved over here to Walker and we've been ready to go over to Duncan Hall. Now I want to start looking at the structure of the institution, because this is where you really begin to see the difference between what we used to call a teacher college and what we might now call the university. In particular, you might not even know what a teacher's college was like. I didn't until I started digging into this. So this is 1960. Essentially, we were one college. It's not like today where you have a college of business and a college of arts and sciences. We were like the college of teaching, and that was it. And these are the departments. And it's quite interesting to look at this list of departments and ask, why are these the departments? And you see some traditional names in there. There's an English department. Or you might ask, oh, no, why aren't some departments in there? For instance, why is home economics in there? Why is industrial arts in there? I mean, there's education psychology. You can figure that's professional courses for teachers, right? And psychology would be primarily educational psychology. Library science, because I'll have to tell you why. Because these were the subjects that were taught in the high school. Okay. Physical ed was taught, art was taught, music was taught, English was taught. Religion was not a typical class. You don't see a religion department. Okay. You also see some combinations of departments like biology and geography and general science. You'll notice also in the list early on that math and physics were one combined department. But at that time, these were the departments because these were the subjects that were taught. Now, you don't see history in there, but history is buried in some, there was something there called social studies. Yeah, social studies. And I looked in the old catalogs and it was the dominant, group. But there were some courses in there called government, like political science, but government wasn't a typical subject, but then it might be something that social science teachers might need to.
Civics, people taught civics.
Do I?
People taught civics.
Yeah, civics, yeah. They probably had some classes by that name.
No computer science?
You move on to 1968. This is the first year that we operated as a university. So we reorganized into 3 colleges. Of course, today, I don't know how many there are. There are a bunch of them, probably don't even know what they are. But to start out, this is what we had. We had the Arts and Sciences Department has kind of the typical list that you would expect to see. We had Fine and Applied Arts. That was everything else except education. Now, of course, you can recognize here that the education folks are the ones that lost out. In other words, essentially, most of the people on the faculty here were professional education people. And so when we became a full university, most of them didn't have anywhere to go. Okay? We didn't fire them, but I mean, they lost power, let's put it that way. And that was an issue early on, as you would expect. There was some tension between the old and the new group. You notice, like in education, they only had 2 departments for now. Now, by 1980, education, you can see it added some departments, and we'd added a school of business. So in 1980, that's what the 4 colleges look like. I think if you examine the arts and sciences carefully, there's some additions and changes and stuff over there. But you can see they completely reorganized the College of Education. And when I say they lost out, that really wasn't intentional, because teacher training has remained a very important mission in this institution. It has in this department. Now I'll start talking about people in the mathematics department. And I want to mention that Dr. Wright stepped out as chairman in 1960. And that is how long he was the chairman.
Wow. Oh, my word.
I was chairman for 8 years. That was long enough.
That's why the building's called Smith, right?
That's right. That's why the building's called
Smith was psychology chair for almost that long.
Exactly. So it's a point of change. The old president has stepped out. Okay. The old chairman stepped out. Similar things are going on in other departments. Okay. And here's what the faculty looked like in 1961-62. I was kind of shocked when we saw this. This was the composition of the math department faculty. Dr. Wright had just left. He was the only PhD in mathematics. Now, several of these people I got to know real well. Star Stacy, he's part of the group. He's married to one of the Darbies. Not only that, I talked many hours to him. He's taught about 5 subjects. He's taught geography and surveying and math and physics. That's what they did in the old days. G.T. Buckland, he was around for several years after I got here and then retired. A couple of those master's people I got to know pretty well. They were around for a couple of years after I got here. So kind of remember this, because when I start looking at change, we want to compare what you see here with what you see in 1980 and what took place in between. Now, here were the people that the math department hired in the 60s. And you won't necessarily know these people, but I'll kind of comment on some of them. Paul Sanders came here in 1962. He came here as chairman of the department, because I just mentioned the only department that left. And right away, there was a lot of change, as you might expect. Paul had fought in World War II. He was probably in his 40s when he came here. After the war, he went to graduate school, got a PhD at Oklahoma State, and he had been at Hardin-Simmons University in Texas for 10 or 15 years. He was like in his 40s when he came here. Arnold McIntyre was a local guy. He became early on our computer expert. He was quite good. He had just an MSMA degree. Ray Graham came here, ABD, Albert dissertation. He later completed his dissertation and got his doctorate. Noel Patterson was a retired professor. He'd already retired at the University of Florida. He just wanted to come to the mountains and teach, but he got up here and took over the department and became the chairman. Tried to make us in the Harvard of the East or something. Now, starting about, oops. Starting about here, these final 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 there I am. We're the young bucks. Most of us are guys, young guys, late 20s, early 30s, and just got our PhDs. And that's what we wanted to build our department on. So we worked hard to recruit young people, which I was in that first wave. Paul Sanders, eventually after 4 or 5 years, they recognized his ability, and he became the provost of the university. He was the provost when I got here. Harvey Durham in the middle, he became the department chairperson. He was the chairman that hired me. I'll also comment on, I put the sort of the topics of people's main interests and dissertations. And I'll move to the next list. You notice in the early beginning, we're kind of heavy on what? Topology and algebra. There's a couple of reasons for that. We weren't in a position where people even knew we existed. I mean, this had been a teacher's college, and most young PhDs weren't aware of this school as a place of employment. It's potentially a good place. And so we started out just to hire good people. And our best recruiting was in the Southeast, and for some reason, most of the schools in the Southeast had all topologists and algebraists on their PhD faculty. Now you'll see as we get further down the list, later into the 70s, our recruiting would get a little more specialized. We picked up some stat people, we picked up some computer science people, we picked up some applied math people and an e-math ed person. So those are the people that came in the 70s. The asterisks are people that weren't here, didn't stay until 1980. They came and went. Okay. So there's 7 or 8 people who came and went in this period. I might mention a couple of these. Mike Carter was the first PhD in statistics that we hired. He came from the University of Georgia. Bill Powell, we wanted to get a really top-notch math ed person, and we got Bill, and he was top-notch. And he came here from Ohio State, and he really built our math ed program, the one we're talking about today. Bo Stubblefield was our first black PhD. I won't get into the history of it, but it's interesting. So Larry Kitchens is sitting back there. Anita Kitchens is sitting back here. Back then, I don't know what goes on now, Anita, but we had a real need for people who were quite good students, but they couldn't do math very well. They had math anxiety and so forth. So we started a program in developmental math, and I hired Anita. We were talking about this the other day, and she asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, I don't know, that's what I hired you for.
He said, I want you to be successful. I don't care what you do. But see, that gave me a lot of confidence because he trusted me, and it was wonderful.
That's right.
Mine was great.
Yeah. Then Bob Winter was our first computer scientist, and he was a top notch. Now keep in mind, in the 1970s, very few schools were even given a PhD in computer science. It was very, very rare. So we were lucky, really, to get Bob. He was from Asheville originally, and he graduated from Georgia Tech. And he stayed 5 years, and he went to Vanderbilt. Got tired of that and went out to some private company. We brought in some good people in the 70s. So that by 1980, this is what the faculty looked like in 1980. So now think back to that faculty description of 1960. That was a pretty big change. It wasn't all that easy. We had to work pretty hard to get this fit. Now let's look at curriculum. Take a minute or two to look at this. Any comments or anything stand out to you?
I didn't have a class in slide rule up here.
Okay, does anybody not know what a slide rule? Anybody never seen a slide rule? I brought one with me, just in case, okay? Yeah, that's kind of interesting, slide rule. What else?
Calculus year 3.
You don't see calculus till the 3rd year. Not only that, the first 2 years, you get more algebra and trig than I think I can do in 2 years. There's also a course up there. Is there a course up there that you might not know, recognize the name of? Theory of equations. Now, in the old days being back before 1960, that was a standard course in the curriculum. And I said, well, what is it? Okay. I'll call it a quick description of it. Here's what it contained. It contained equations being polynomial equations, n bigger than or equal to 3. Okay. And it included, I actually found a textbook for theory of equations online, a complete textbook from 1948. And it's quite interesting to read because there's not much higher mathematics in it, but it's an incredible amount of computation and tedious derivations and stuff. Incredible. I'll hate to have to go through it. Okay, so it was polynomial equations, theory and solution. Theory being stuff like do you have a solution I even got, or the real or complex and so forth, and then define it. And a lot of the methodology was algebraic. It had one iterative method in there, Newton's method. And there's an old method, I'm trying to remember the guy's name, starts with an H. maybe
Karen?
Horners, man. And of course, the only calculus in the whole course was the Emeritus method. There was no higher mathematics in there. So why did this course disappear? The subject matter didn't disappear, it just went somewhere else. Okay, now down here in linear equations, that was old-fashioned page after page after page of stuff about determinants and properties and solving equations. It had matrices in it. Okay, lots of row operations. It even essentially did all of the ring properties, algebraic properties, the matrix addition and multiplication. There's no mention of a linear space or a linear transformation or representing a linear transformation with a matrix. So all that stuff ended up over eventually in linear algebra. And as far as I can tell, a lot of the stuff that was in there, in theory of equations just disappeared all that. And the little bit of stuff about iterative techniques went over into some numerical methods. Now, these were the available electives. Okay. Now that you've seen this, you might wonder, well, what did a master's degree look like? Well, actually, there was no master's degree, 360 or whatever, out of the mathematics department. You would get a master's degree in secondary teaching in mathematics over in the ed department. And the curriculum was about 2/3 of professional education and about 1/3 mathematics. And I can't do everything, so I'm concentrating on the undergraduate stuff here. Now, by 1970, the BS in math secondary education looked like this. It's beginning to look more like modern curriculum. There's one course name you don't see in there, though. What is it? It's now taught as a 2011 course. Linear algebra. Right? Now, there is some, see that sequence, 321, 322, 323, called modern algebra. There's some linear, about half of, maybe half of the linear algebra course in that third part of that 323. Okay.
No analysis.
Were there any comments about this? Now, yes.
I do, so when it says year two, I mean, when there's 3 course sequences, are those to be taken in sequence across, or is that just the approximate timing in the degree, or?
Approximate.
Okay, so they weren't like required to take.
This is on the quarter system, this is not semester system, yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't brought that's gonna come up later.
Okay.
So everybody understands that the quarter system, there's actually 4 quarters, 3 in the academic year and 1 in the summer. So all of this is really describing what would happen during the 2 fall semesters when they're in course. Now, this is what, in 1980 now, this is what it looked like. So you see the linear algebra classes popped up in there.
In analysis.
So, I forget how many hours left is it. There's a couple, 3 courses probably. So we've gone from almost a non-math major to actually within 10 years. Actually, that 10-year thing, that degree was installed a couple of years before that, about 1970. Now, there was also a BA in mathematics, 1970. But nobody took it. I bet there weren't 2 of them issued. It was a very difficult degree. Now, I will mention that in 1965, The CUPM, which a lot of MAA, which a lot of the faculty I know are aware of, for the non-faculty people, the MAA is the Math Association of America. It's one of the top math associations in the country, but sort of the top association that focuses on undergraduate mathematics instruction, education, and curriculum. They have a standing committee. CUPM is Committee on Undergraduate Programs in Mathematics. And every now and then they issue a significant report. They did so in 1965. I know they put one out about 10 years ago, I think 2015, on the curriculum as well as the calculus course. I find it online and read it. Now, what I just summarized the report here in terms of the courses, so I could kind of quickly talk about what their recommendations were. But the G, A, and N. G is for general math. They kind of gave a general description. Here's sort of their ideas about how the applied math would be. T is the teacher math component. So you can pretty well see that in 1970, the degree we were looking at a while ago, we were getting close to this. Okay. And by 1980, we were pretty well there. This is an interesting part of the CUPM report. You get a chance to read it. What's interesting about it? CUPM feels that the question of how to begin computation and how related to mathematics is not ready to be resolved. And it wasn't. In 1965, we didn't even know what computer science was. In 1965, we, meaning me and sort of the math community, we thought of computing as being computation, as part of mathematics, as a tool. Computer graphics, we'd never heard of it, never envisioned it. I never even saw anything about computer graphics till the early 70s. Had I think an MA, National MA meeting. It was out of the MIT lab. It still, I first saw computer graphics when I saw an Apple II computer in 1979. Very crude graphics, but wow! I said, "Give me one of those." I got one. My wife's sitting over there. She complains I spent too much money for it. So I found that very telling. Okay? So you young people have to realize that in 1965. I hated computers. I mean, they were a pain in the computers. You had to punch cards and do all these weird things to get you. Then you got a program. If you didn't use it over and over again, it wasn't worth programming. You get your program back, and the only error message, the message you got was it didn't work. You had to start all over again. It was pretty crude. Wasn't it, Larry? Larry was a statistician. You always just set up the programs you need, just use them over and over again, right? Okay, I'm gonna kind of skip through the 60s and just to mention some things that real quick. Like 1965, that's when that BA program was set up that I mentioned. The very first computer course was set up that year out of 400 number one. We started, well, I wasn't here, but they started a program in junior college teaching. Okay. And actually it was quite successful for several years. And the reason was the community college was just getting cranked up in the 60s. Okay. The first state supported ones were in the 50s, and then they started going through. So we had quite a few people would come in here from the community college, get a master's degree. And it was a reasonably solid degree. There was only 2 or 3 professional courses. It was mostly mathematics. I mentioned because I brought up linear algebra, that the first linear algebra course appeared. This is in our department, 67, 68, but it was an upper level course. It wasn't that something that course. And that was the first year that, sort of a standard freshman coming in would take some calculus. Now, you have to keep in mind that calculus wasn't taught in the high schools, except in very few. The AP program started in the 50s, but it didn't really get going until the 1970s. So very few students, and particularly in North Carolina, except maybe Charlotte and Raleigh and those places, got a chance to take calculus, even to have a really good pre-calculus class. So it's usually necessary that even good students that were coming in would need pre-calculus. 68, 69 was the first year we had separate listings for computer classes. And the fellow I mentioned earlier, Arnold McIntyre, who was just the MA, he was the computer guy, he set these courses up. So there were several of them. Now moving into the 70s, we've already looked at the curriculum. I'll mention some of the other course and curriculum highlights. Now that's when that 2000, well actually it's 200, we're still on the quarter system. But that sophomore level linear algebra pops up. We had hired an applied mathematician, Marvin Irwin, about 1970. He put in some applied math and numerical methods classes. You can see the parallel between the courses and the faculty as they come in. There's Anita's 0010, or 010 at that time. I mentioned Bill Paul, the guy who came from Ohio State. The summer program here, even in the old days, was big because so many teachers like to come back here to summer school because it's nice up here. And Bill wanted to revise the master's program, particularly for the summer people. So he established a new set of courses for secondary teachers. And I taught one of these classes, the linear algebra class one time. And these were good classes. I mean, they paid for teachers, but they were good mathematics classes. Now we're in the statistics business. We had our first statistician, Mike Carter, came in. And of course, he comes in, he wants some courses, and he wants to start our programs, but he sets up some classes. '73, '74, we got a new name. We were the Department of Mathematics, now we're Math Sciences. This was the sort of embrace the notion that we're more than just straight mathematics. We were anything mathematical, bring it on. So there was some good out of that and some bad, actually. 75, 76, we went to the scholastic system. And this was not easy. It's not an exact one-to-one correspondence between all core courses on the quarter system. There is between some of them. If you got the right number of hours for 3 solid quarters, you can break it in half. But all these courses were 2 quarters, 1 quarter. It was, we had to redefine a lot of the classes. Not pleasant. Now, I hadn't mentioned kind of the service role of the department. Getting close. But things started to grow in that direction, not only because we were growing, but other places were growing. So when the College of Business came along, they came in and said, we want a calculus for business and economics majors. And we worked very amicably and closely with them and worked out a course, and it worked out pretty good. I guess we still have that class. We still teach that. Something like that.
They wanted more algebra and less calculus, so it's now.
That's the combination, not tough enough.
I don't remember what it's
It was
called.
pretty big.
Business mathematics with calculus, maybe.
Yeah, well, for a while it was pretty big course.
Oh, it is now, just a different number.
Just a different number, yeah. Then the statistical methods grew because other majors required that. Social sciences, on down the road in exactly 1980, like criminal justice became a big issue in those courses. And I mentioned the 5810 class because that's a nice example of where, were you involved with that, Larry? Developing it?
Yeah.
Yes, where our guys, went over there and worked with the people, and that was really what psychology was when, you know, of course, that's not a big volume class, but once a year or something like that. That's really pretty good volume. And here was an interesting thing that we did. We set up a non-teaching degree in mathematics. We were the first department to have a non-teaching degree. And you couldn't just go say, well, a BS degree non-teaching, because there wasn't one in the college. The college had to have the shell or the framework for it. So we went and lobbied the College of Arts and Sciences. They set up a committee. They created a shell for a BS degree. Well, we jumped on it. We were the first department to have it. And we set it up with 3 options corresponding to the 3 topics in the department at that time: computer science, statistics, and so forth. That's what that degree looked like. If you put mathematics into that framework, this is what a BS non-teaching mathematics degree would have looked like under that BS choosing the mathematics option. If you chose statistics, I don't have it written up. It had everybody took a core, and then they might take more statistics classes. And what happened was we had these options going, and the administration, actually the administration in Chapel Hill said, too much trouble doing, let's not just make them degrees. So by 1980, these had actually become degrees. Of course, it wasn't too long before computer science became a separate department. Of course, computer science became something that we never envisioned. You know, who would have thought that AI would take over the world? We thought we'd still be solving the equations, right? With the computer. Well, that's how all that came about. Okay, I want to try to finish in about 45, 50 minutes, and a few more minutes. I thought I'd briefly mention calculators. Our first calculator in 1960 was the slide rule. We went through a spell where we had some desktop calculators. The early ones were about this big. The early ones you pull a crank, the later ones became electronic. And some of them, I know, Larry, y'all had a special one at one time, wasn't it always programmable or was electronic, wasn't it? The stack calculator. Yeah. Maybe it wasn't. But I know in that generation, some of them were approaching being small computers. They had some programming capabilities. In 1973, the handheld calculator came along. Now, I'm not talking about a graphics calculator. I'm talking about the ones they give away in popcorn boxes when you get a magazine subscription. It's the HP 35. 35 was sort of 35 buttons on it, functions. Tom Murkowski in the physics department came over and showed us one. He was interested in the digital electronics. So we said, we got to have 2 of those. $300. $300 for each one of them. No, we bought 2 of them. We built a box for Marvin Herbal, the applied mathematician, that had the display on the front, so his class could see the numbers coming out of it when he did iterations and so forth. That's what we were competing on, $300. Now, one of the inflation calculators turned out into $2,400. What that $300 would be worth. Computers, early on, like the 1960s, around an IBM 1130. It was stated, it was a small computer, but IBM, as I recall, had just come out with a new line computer, and it was all new semiconductors and kind of the latest technology at that time. As I mentioned before, it was a pain. It was very difficult to interact with the computer. You really couldn't interact with it. You just put stuff in there and get stuff out. That's what you did. If you've never seen one, you had these Dexter cards and you punch holes in there for the code, or you had paper tapes. Eventually, they had teletype machines, and we got all excited. We set up a teletype lab over in Sanford Hall. Pretty amazing when you think about it. We did get our own mini computer in 1978. Bob Winter, the computer scientist, he got a National Science Foundation grant. We got with, I've got the details on this somewhere, but anyway, it was the first class, what they call mini computer. Mini not being micro and not being big, it was kind of like, I don't remember, they wasn't all that big. Right? Then the boom hit, the microcomputer, the first microcomputer. When I saw some of these old things where you plug in stuff and turn knobs and stuff like that. But the first functional microcomputer I saw, I think, was Commodore's head. You could play some games on it. But I got excited in 1979. I saw an Apple II with the graphics. Yeah, were you raising your hand? No, I did not. Now, at that time, I thought I'd bring up the price too. It was about $2,000 in 1980 money. You get the computer, you could buy a monitor, and you could buy a printer. It's about $2,000. That'd be $8,000 now. For a computer that was a 16K machine that you could expand by putting cards in it. You understand? I wish I was able. If you know someone, you can open the thing up and you stick cards in there and add memory to it. Few quick comments. Of course, during this period, as you can imagine, administrative leadership was very important. In particular, there were fights going on. We were playing a zero-sum budget battle. Trying to build something, just we were just starting out. And then there was a lot of discussion about what's this university really going to be? What's our model? Are we trying to be like Harvard or something? Are we going to be somebody unique? You kind of see where we ended up, and I think the early leadership foresaw, which is here today. And a lot of that was putting an emphasis on the student. Eventually, we'll get to where we'll be a research institution, where the student is always a part of our institution. And I think that's what the leadership at that time was really pushing. Also, encouraging innovation and change. I put there because there's a lot of change going on, and they wanted us to be creative and do innovative things. I think throughout this period, our departmental camaraderie was exceptional. That wasn't true in some departments. There were splits and divisions about philosophy of things and all that sort of stuff. But of course, we had arguments. People got mad and all kind of meetings and stuff. That's what happened. I think our relationships with other departments overall were quite good. Now, I will mention that once we got into the 80s, there were some explosions university-wide. I don't have to talk about this. I'm talking about explosions like with administrators, and deans and faculty, particularly about the philosophy and where the university was headed. The environment that we were working in was decent. I never did like Sanford Hall because the house wasn't even insulated from the first day in there. They came back later and put in new windows and insulation. Our teaching schedules, before we got here, people were teaching 15 to 18 hours. That was reduced to 12. But we could always give several people reduced loads for research, scholastic activity, and that tended to grow as time went by. 1980. Class sizes, we never had big classes. So the biggest class I can ever remember was 40 or 50 students. And most of the classes were 30 or so or less. So that was good. We didn't have a whole lot of adjuncts or part-time people, but that grew. And as we added them, there were exceptional people. I think the key parts of that. I was gonna put in the whole thing about the library, but you said it didn't found. I'll just quickly say, when I arrived here in 1968, the library was amazingly good. And the reason was, we had a faculty member, Bob Richardson, who was our library representative. And those of you who know Bob, he was a hustler. And by the end of the year, he was spending half of everybody else's budget because they weren't spending it. And the way we were budgeted, at least in the old days, I don't know what they do now. If you didn't spend your budget, not only did you send it back over the administration bill, they had to send it back to Holland. There wasn't any carryover. So Bob would go there and make sure the money was spent. So I got here in 1968. That was a pretty good basis of the journals, the AMS, MAA, and so and back issues. And that continued, we continued to get pretty good budget of that. I think the scholarly activity and research and that sort of thing gradually grew. Okay. When we added people who were very research oriented, and they did research. I think most everybody was doing some type of what we defined to be scholastic activity. We became very active in the professional organizations. We got pretty good funding for travel. Salaries, well, you know, you're at the mercy of the state. In the 70s, we actually had two energy crises. One of them was the Iran crisis. That's when Khomeini took over from the Shah, and then there was a big oil crisis. And there was one in '73 because there was an Arab-Israeli war. And interesting, we started getting some external funding. In fact, we got quite a bit when we got into the 80s. And we had we still have this off-campus scholar assignment.
It has a new name.
You know,
It has a new name.
what's it called?
Reassigned time leave.
Well,
RTL.
we call it, Paul Sanders invented that. And Paul he's the guy who was the math chairman coming in. We didn't have, I don't guess we didn't have a sabbatical. And Paul was a smart guy, he racked his brain and said, I know what I'll do. So he read all the legal contracts. There's nothing in the contract that says that you can't work for Appalachian State University and be in Nottingham, England.
I know.
So I went to Nottingham, England. So he assigned people to go do scholarly and research work off campus and got away with it. And I'm pretty sure that most every university in the system found out about it and they copied it and started. Well, I was going to mention one more thing because then I'll quit. You know, there's a lot of politics in education today. And back in the 60s, we had our Jesse Helms. He was our famous conservative senator. And he cooked up what he called the speaker ban law. And this is what it said. He thought there were communists in taking over the universities. Now there are communists. They're just left-wing radicals, we call them. Okay? Now, obviously, item number 3 is in the Constitution, I think, and then the 5th Amendment of the Constitution. So obviously the courts threw this out, but it was around for 6 years, and the last year it was in effect was when I interviewed. I had to sign this thing when I interviewed because I gave a talk. Anyway, that's it. That's the halfway there, I'm not almost there. I'm around, but I don't talk about anything. I was here, so living history. Well, would you agree that things have changed a little bit? Because I didn't realize all this. So I actually gave this talk 10 years ago, and back now you can go online, you can get all the catalogs. It's interesting. Every ASU catalog, going back to 1908 or something like that, when they started a thing called the bulletin. So I found all the catalogs. I found that textbook. Anything you want, it's out there.
They're still going back to the 60s or so, or not a complete set in the library up in the in the coffee room upstairs. There's a, because I've seen the slide rule course flipping through some old bulletins up there.
Yeah.
So be told, when did you get here?
84.
Hey, so 80 to 2000, it's your assignment.
I think of it this way, I call this the foundation. I think maybe by 2000, I think we could legitimately call ourselves a university. And by 2020, I think we can now call ourselves a good university in the concept that I see our university to be. I think that we're doing a lot of things now we certainly didn't do back then. But we wouldn't be here now if we hadn't done all that, so it takes time. You can't just hang up a sign and prepare yourself to be here.
So were other departments growing similarly in terms of faculty?
Imagine that every department on campus is going through the same thing. 15 state universities are going through similar things.
So how did that, I'm just thinking now, right? Big thing now where you hire somebody, where on earth are they gonna live? I mean, was there sort of a housing crunch? I'm curious if at that time there was
Not as bad.
any sort of similar housing, where did people live, all these people who were moving in?
You try to figure out why is housing here so expensive? Well, one reason is we got all this second home market competing against it. Another reason now is nobody is building housing except for students. No apartments, no. I mean, I understand they built this housing up here on the hill and they say faculty can't afford it. It's just gonna be so expensive. When we came here, there were actually down here on
River Street.
Rivers, Faculty Street,
Faculty.
there was a bunch of old houses down there. They were called faculty houses.
Stone houses.
Yeah,
In fact.
and they were okay, except they had coal furnaces in them.
And trees.
You had to shovel the coal and they used a lot of coal. But no, it wasn't as bad, but it gradually got worse and worse and worse.
I think right now, I don't exactly know how to ask this question, but right now we're at a point, I think we're at an inflection point where because of AI and the pandemic and different modalities, there's a lot of, I think, expectations about what education, what math education looks like, what a university, functions as. I mean, are we here or are we not? There's some questions we're at a point of reckoning. Do you think, like in this time span, was there a time where you felt that it had a lot of, questions like this moment, like was there a particular moment in the course of this history that you think was a place where you really had to reevaluate sort of what the learning goals were in a certain way, or like an identity kind of?
So much in this period.
Yeah.
I think the biggest mistake that was made in the 70s throughout the country was we made too many universities that were just alike. And everybody wanted to be one, and everybody kind of grew into the same thing. Now we ended up with all these schools, and there's a mismatch between the schools and the people. I mean, back in the 60s, everybody wanted a PhD program. My opinion was that's stupid. Well, why should we have that makes sense for us. Maybe someday we'll need it, but I think I was right. I don't think the industry demanded it. I really don't know what's going on with the master's programs now, but I would think that the teacher master's program would continue, as far as I can see, to be an important master's program. I mean, there may be other programs that you want, but you got to have the students that match up with the program. But we didn't have any technology that was threatening us.
Well,
I mean, people came out and said, "Oh, TV's gonna take over." Well, we saw how long that lasted. That's the only technology I can think of that popped up that people thought was gonna take over education.
Well, the other big thing now, the number of high school graduates is not increasing. I mean, so it has grown steadily from the time you're talking about all the way till this year. This year it peaks in North Carolina. I think this year or last year, I forget it. I don't know if it's as much anymore, but that's a real problem. So the growth will not be the same because there aren't student growth.
And a bunch of our sister schools already know this. We've been lucky, I think, at App to not really lose
Oh, yeah.
compared to other schools.
Well, if you look nationwide, there are schools that have shrunk only 30-40%. And it's just because of the change in the demographics in their area.
But you know, can I say something?
Yeah.
We came in 72 and I look back on my experience coming here and our experience coming here. And it was just an honor to be a part of this department because you had about a handful of individuals with the task of developing a program for the university system. And you've said all this, but it went, you know, and it was remarkable. Arnold took the computer stuff, and you know, and everything was just divvied out. Like if we didn't have somebody that, Rudy Kurd would take that. He did a lot with the computer. There was Theresa came in. Just everybody would just.
Mark Harris wrote his own programs.
Yeah, and Mark, and he had that company, Granny's something.
Granny's software.
Granny's what?
His software.
Yeah, but the point is, it was so neat to see the department work, and where I came in is this program, this grant was written by education, the Kellogg Foundation for $750,000 university-wide for the university, and in it was one tenure track position for math because they realized the weakness in the students in math, and so so I had been doing I did the developmental math program stuff, but you know, I remember like questions you were asking, like what are we doing? Like where are we going? I remember at department meetings we'd say, well, should these, you know, part of the people would say, well, these people just shouldn't be here. And you know, and you could see why. I mean, they weren't prepared for the curriculum. And then other people would, you know, and it was a real debate, like what should we teach them? And so, and when that conversation I had with you, you said, look, I don't care what you do, just so you're successful. And that's what he meant. And then I said, well, what? What'd you say?
If you're not successful, you're gone.
Well, yeah, sure. Right. And then Arnold was huge in this department. Arnold McIntyre, because not only was he the computer science person, but he knew psychology well. And we had this lady that came, I can't remember her name, but she was a PhD historian, and she came to our school, and she gave a colloquium for us in Sanford, and she said, I have math anxiety. I've got a PhD in history and I have math anxiety. I cannot do math. And she talked, and she was touring the country, delivering this message at these schools. And you know, I remember I was walking out because I was started teaching this developmental math course. And I said, oh yeah. And I walked out the door with Arnold, just, you know, side by side. I said, hey, Arnold, you have any ideas? Because I knew he knew psychology. He knew dreams. He knew everything. And he would get a hard time for knowing all that stuff too. So he wasn't real public with it. He wasn't real, hey, here's what I have. No. He was tired of getting knocked down about it. But so I said, Arnold, you have any ideas? He said, oh yeah. And so I went and started talking to Arnold, and he was talking about cognitive psychology and this kind of stuff. And so our developmental math program has a very big component of cognitive psychology, because you can't teach math to a person who knows they can't do math. If you know you can't do it, you can't do it. But you got to teach them using cognitive psychology to believe in themselves, and that was a big part of developmental math, and we did that since the 70s, started that kind of thing, and you know, and other components like learning styles and this kind of stuff, but we put it into practice, and we had really good results. I mean, really good results. You know, we did statistical analysis. I knew the statistician here. But we did, you know, yeah, statistical studies, and we had incredible results. Like no matter who taught our course, we had like 80% success rate in developmental math all along, and but everybody had the same quote philosophy, implemented in different ways, but it was all with the philosophy of, you can do this. You just gotta, one student says, you mean that's all I have to do? I have to learn to think logically? I said, yes, and you have to work hard, and you gotta keep up with the stuff. And yeah, basically, well, I can do that. And yeah, it was this kind of thing, conversations like that would happen all the time. But it was a beautiful experience for me, because I just loved it. I mean, I couldn't have been in a better place, this place right here, because people would accept what you did, right? I mean, no matter what you did. I never went to my department chair and had an idea where they said, nah, that won't work, and you can't do that. It was always, well, yeah, let's look at it, or whatever. It was always very, very accepting. Every department chairman was very accepting, always, and supported you. You had some student go in and kind of, get at, complain or what, but always had support. And that support, that support, you were talking about Harvey Durham and Paul Sanders. I mean, those people were such strong, ethical people. They were beautiful. I mean, they set the, you already said it, but it was like true. Those people are so strong. But anyway, I said too much.
Anybody else?
Sorry, Eli.
I got a question, Wayne, maybe, or anybody else. When did the university or Teachers College move from Edgemont up here into Boone? It happened after the
I
flood.
don't remember, I know what you're talking.
You do or don't?
Yeah.
So the university originally was off of the mountain, down in Edgemont is where it started. And it's
You mean the original-
moved up here.
Yeah, and at one time, they were thinking about moving it to Ashe County. And put the college over there.
But if you ever go down there, I mean, I've done it, I just don't remember. They have pictures when they started down there, and then I think it was the flood in the 20s or something, and just wiped that area out. It was kind of like a Helene event.
The flood was in the 40s.
Or,
The
well, I
flood,
think they had.
they were already here in the
They had a
40s.
couple of
The 40s flood took out the railroads, but the
Yeah.
university was here
Yeah.
in the 40s.
Yeah.
But I think they moved within like 5 years of the establishment, Alan. I think it was that early in the history.
I think we're done if anybody has any.
You really, my grandparents were